Chapter 15. These were the kind of days that caused Tara to wake with a start, ready to pounce. The opening of the new exhibit had sparked national media attention, and the guest list for today's opening was the crème de la crème of Embassy Row and the haughtiest of Ottawa's haughty upper crust. And she was the epicenter, the cog that kept everything moving in synchronous orbit. She had to admit, Adina had done a great job getting the exhibit ready. Her research painted a compelling story of 18th century Scotland, and focusing on the throes of war through a prism of rarely seen art had turned out to be a brilliant idea. Of course, Tara thought with a smile, it was mine. She stood beside the National Gallery's director, André Borgans. He was getting set to address the dignitaries, journalists, and other assorted guests who stood outside the glass-walled entrance, dominated by the hanging banner announcing the Art of Rebellion, Art de la Rébellion, exhibit. "Fantastic!" André whispered to her. "Great work." She smiled again, thinking about Adina and the sparks that flew between them, bringing the exhibit to life. "Nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight," she mused. The words from Bruce Cockburn were an inspiration she often drew upon. While others might seek the path of least resistance, Tara sought out challenge and never considered losing to be an option. "Thanks, André. I've got a great team," she replied. "You got my notes?" "Yeah, thanks, Tara," André said, stepping forward to address the group. "Bienvenue, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, to the National Gallery of Canada," he started, projecting his voice like the experienced public speaker he had become over the last 5 years. "We're proud to give you a sneak peek of our new exhibit and a collection of artwork and artifacts never seen before in North America." Tara had always admired André with his doctorate in art history and his long list of published articles, but his real talent was showman. He knew how to sell the sizzle. As the tour proceeded through the exhibit, Tara took note of the attendees she had invited, drawing satisfaction from the black-tie evening gown crowd. She checked them off in her head. The ambassador to Canada from the United Kingdom, the president of the Robert Burns Association of North America, and the head of the St. Andrew's Society of Toronto. They all mingled together, sipping sparkling wine or testing their olfactory glands with samples of 25-year-old Bunnahabhain single malt scotch. Formally attired servers offered delicate salmon canapés, miniature haggis, and Angus meatballs on toothpicks tipped with tiny blue Scottish flags. There was also a gaggle of local and national politicians, including the mayor of Ottawa, a proud Scot apparently, who arrived in full Highland attire, towing a group of TV cameramen and newspaper photographers behind him. Perfect, Tara thought. A photo of him and the Duncan Cello would hopefully grace the front page of the morning papers. Maybe show up on the late-night TV newscasts as well, and of course make for great social media feeds. Tara looked around to see if the NAC conductor, Friedrich Lang, had arrived. He had accepted her invitation, and she was curious to see if Adina's description of him as a fire-breathing dragon was accurate. She noticed a stern-looking, gray-haired man making his way through the group toward her. She studied him carefully. Maybe Adina was right to be afraid of this old German. Where did he get his training? The KGB? "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present the star of the show," André called out, directing everyone to focus their attention towards him. He stood beside the Duncan Cello, shimmering in the spotlights and floating in mid-air above a stone podium, as if held aloft by unseen forces. The tiny black piano wires that created the illusion of the cello floating in mid-air were completely invisible, and Tara again admired the effect. "The cello you see here has never been exhibited outside of Scotland," André continued. "It was built by Robert Duncan of Aberdeen more than 270 years ago in his workshop. He learned his craft from an Italian, some of you may have heard before, the young Antonio Stradivari." There was a murmur as everyone tried to move a little closer toward the cello suspended before them. "I would ask that you not touch the instrument, please. We've come up with a unique way of presenting it. But do keep in mind what your mother told you. If you break it, you bought it. And I'm not sure if you have the $5 million available on your credit card." He joked with a grin. There was some laughter, and a female news photographer moved in, looking for a dramatic angle to best capture the instrument that seemed to levitate before her. As Tara admired the proceedings, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Nice work, mademoiselle. It was Philip, dressed for the occasion in a crisp black suit and a sky-blue tie. "Hey, you made it!" she exclaimed, turning to him. He leaned in to give her a hug and a kiss on each cheek. "Bonsoir," he responded. "You pulled out all the stops. Quite a gathering of Bytown snobs." "But of course," Tara smiled. "Dee does her thing, I do mine. We're not just pretty faces, you know." "And what's wrong with a pretty face?" Philip grinned. Tara felt a flush warming her cheeks. Before she could respond, Friedrich Lang approached them. "Miss Kormos," he began stiffly. "Thank you for the invitation. Remarkable display." "Thank you, maestro," Tara responded. She pointed to Philip standing beside her. "Do you know Philip Levesque from the Ottawa Citizen?" Philip extended his hand. "Mr. Lang," he said, "I don't know if you remember me. I interviewed you when you first came to Ottawa." The conductor did not appear to remember. His expression was somewhat puzzled as he gingerly took Philip's hand. "Oh, really?" He paused for a moment. "Very nice to meet you again." "Thank you. My girlfriend, Adina Stewart, is excited to be working with you," Philip responded. Tara watched to see how Lang would respond to this. Again a puzzled look washed over him. "Adina?" Lang asked. "Your girlfriend?" He paused, looking at the Duncan cello with interest. He continued without taking his eyes off the instrument, speaking in a distracted manner. "She's a very talented young lady. I believe she may go far, performing with the symphony." His words trailed off as he seemed captured by the Duncan cello. He studied it carefully. Another photo op flashed through Tara's mind. "Maestro, let's take a closer look." Friedrich Lang had an odd feeling as he moved towards the Duncan cello. There was a sense he had, adjusting his glasses, that there was something wrong. The object the shallow Canadian bourgeoisie gathered here were fawning over, in their typical stupidity, somehow did not seem to be the same one he had seen in his studio. He inspected it carefully, removing his glasses and taking a closer look, shaking his head the entire time. The young lady who had introduced herself to him when he arrived as Tara Kormos from the National Gallery, and who also happened to be the boss of his new cellist, Adina Stewart, stepped up beside him. "I sometimes wonder about all the musicians who have played this instrument over the years," she said to him, interrupting his forensic inspection. She moved closer, together with the annoying journalist. "Don't you think it must have quite a story to tell?" "Yes, indeed it certainly would," he replied. He noticed that Tara had dragged along a photographer and a TV cameraman with her. She knows how to play the game, he thought. He had an idea. "It would make a very good picture if you would let me, Miss Kormos, play something on the instrument," he suggested. "Just for the cameras, of course. Something very short." He watched to see how she would react. He could tell she was a sly administrator from the way her eyebrows raised at his suggestion, while she maintained a smile and considered his offer. "That would make good TV," she responded. "Wait here for a minute. Let me get it down for you." When Friedrich finally got his hands on the precious instrument a few minutes later, his suspicions were all but confirmed. It seemed highly unlikely this was the Duncan cello. It was partly the wood grain. From what he could see, peering inside the cello, it seemed wrong. Also the schneck, or the scroll as his English-speaking colleagues referred to it, that made him look twice, and then a third time. The scroll was the delicate carving at the end of the neck of the cello. Its main purpose was simply decorative. But this one seemed wrong somehow. When Adina had passed out in his office a week ago, he had studied the old instrument she had brought with her. He wanted to see for himself what made it so valuable. He traced his fingers over the scroll and examined it closely, noticing the scar and nicks, the way the varnish had weathered, with a little black blob of it stuck inside one of its grooves. Now, as he stood smiling beside Miss Kormos, holding the bow she had brought him, thoughts raced through his mind. The scroll of this instrument lacked the blobs of varnish, like someone had wanted to remove these blemishes. But he knew that would be almost impossible unless the scroll had been replaced. He brought his bow across the strings and swept across them slowly. The sound was not even close. It lacked depth, tone, and the haunting somber richness that moved him so deeply in his studio. As his short recital proceeded, captured by the cameras, he realized this was good publicity for his own work. But was he right? Was the real Duncan cello somewhere else? After he finished and took a short bow, he turned to thank the gallery administrator. You are absolutely correct, Miss Cormos. Indeed, the Duncan Cello would have a grand history, Lang said coyly. Would have, she repeated. Friedrich wasn't sure what was happening here. He was almost certain, though, the instrument he just played was not the Duncan Cello. Excuse me, madam, he smiled. Sometimes my English is, well, it's not my first language. Oh, maestro, your English is great, she responded. I have heard so much about you from Adina. You know she did all the research for this exhibit before she left. She paused for a moment and then added, She's trying so hard to impress you. Friedrich looked at her blankly. Left? What do you mean? She's gone up to her parents' cottage to practice. I've known Adina since we were kids. She's dreamed of playing with the NAC since forever. And now you've given her a chance to live her dream. Miss Cormos beamed like she was Adina's mother. Lang smiled, nodding his head. He suddenly had an idea where the real Duncan Cello might be. How far away is her cottage from the city? I don't know, maybe an hour or so, she responded. Adina packed up, took her cello, and said she needed to be alone to practice. She really wants to be ready for you. Friedrich nodded his head and looked down again at the imposter cello. Why do I get the feeling that you're not impressed with the star of our show? She asked. He considered his words carefully and nodded. I think you might... But before he could finish more, the man who had been talking previously called out to her. Tara, can you come over here? The man called out. Lang recognized him from the introduction. He was the director of the gallery. Excuse me, Mr. Lang, I have to go. I'll try to find you later. She turned and hurried away, leaving him alone. A staffer from the gallery took the cello from him. He watched as it was raised again to the place of honor under the lights. He was about to leave when the annoying journalist from the newspaper stood up beside him. I hear you have new work, the man said with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Yes, that is true, Lang responded. Adina told you about it. She did indeed, the young journalist replied coldly. He paused and moved in close. And I know for a fact that you stole the music from her. Who the fuck is this asshole? Lang wondered. I stole it. That's quite an accusation. He looked at the man's name tag. Mr. Levesque? The din of conversation around them created a bubble that provided a sense of privacy, even in such an open public space. Friedrich sneered at the brash reporter who stood before him. Voyage of Destiny is my work. Too bad we have copies of the original score, Levesque replied. A photocopy proves nothing, Lang responded. I am giving Adina a chance to perform with the National Arts Center Orchestra, but if you'd rather pursue this, I could easily dismiss her, and... He paused, making sure he had the asshole reporter's full attention. Make sure she never performs with another symphony orchestra anywhere in the world again. Friedrich studied the reporter's reaction. He was a cool customer. He didn't seem fazed. Perhaps another approach would be more effective. You know, my composition isn't the story you should be investigating. Really? And why is that, Mr. Lang? Lang moved his head closer to Philip and whispered, Go ask Adina. I'm sure the gallery would love to know what she's done with the real Duncan Cello.